Now, would you like to have about 60% more information out of your interview? Hi, this is Stan Walters. Welcome to episode 44, Narrative or Accusatory. One of these techniques makes the case, the other one breaks it. So one of those common things that I see in the interview room is the interviewer taking one particular position and wants to get more information, but is engaging in counterproductive tactics that essentially suppress that process. In a narrative interview, the objective is far more about finding truth. It's about information. How much information can I get in the time frame that I've got allotted with this subject? Now, research, and I was just looking at a couple of pieces just before I came into the studio to make sure I had these correct. There were two studies that I looked at that showing that the narrative interview process gets an average of roughly 60% more than other methods that are being used. So right off the bat, why would you use something else? Now, the accusatory interview, the end game, the objective, let's get a confession. Well, you got a risk there with the confession. Typically what happens with the confession, you get one thing you want and you quit. Also indicative of an accusatory interview is the interviewer walks in already with confirmation bias. They've already got their mind made up. So if they ask questions, the answers don't fit or align with their hypothesis, they tend to reject it. Now, interviewing is a scientific-based process. And in a scientific principle, you do not make an objective or a hypothesis before you go in. You let the results dictate your analysis. Okay, so the first part is finding the truth, getting information as much as you can get, average is 60% more, or the accusatory style, which has a tendency to suppress or to lock out information. Now, the focus on these two is totally different. Okay, the focus on a narrative interview is establishing rapport, building that connection with the subject. I shared with you before studies of talking to inmates in prisons in 3 different countries and showed that the one thing that inmates, when they were arrested, when they were being interviewed, if the interviewer would listen to them, they would talk as well as treat them with respect. Accusatory interviews are more dominating about establishing control. There's an alpha or an apex predator in the room, and the interviewer decides it's their job to shut the subject down or to lecture them or to correct their behavior or call them out and expect compliance. Then they typically only ask questions that will fit that predetermined assumption that they have made prior to going into the room. Now, interview tactics, the question tactics between narrative and accusatory are completely different. In an information-based interview, the narrative form, the idea is direct positive confrontation without attacking, without hammering the subject. Help me understand. I am misunderstood about the part where it said you came in the room and you saw the baby on the bed. There are some things I'm confused about. Would you please go through that part again? If that's a problem spot, you just raise the cognitive load on the subject, and that's where they begin to make mistakes. The techniques in an accusatory interview is all about manipulation. Now, one of the future episodes, we're going to talk about influence and persuasion versus manipulation and coercion. Manipulation is the negative impact. Manipulation, in fact, is where I try to attack or disrupt the thinking of the other person, get them to doubt themselves. Okay? Now, question format. We're going to talk about this in a class I got coming up with arson investigators. There is the open-ended exploratory interview, open exploratory questions. Who, what, where, how, when, and why are nothing more than report writing. You need to have more open questions like, tell me, show me, explain, describe, talk me through, teach me how, where you have the subject giving more of an explanation than defending yes or no or reacting to an attack. Accusatory interviews tend to have a far higher amount of leading questions, short answer questions, or setting traps. Did you do it because you hate it or you just hate women in general? And it's more of that feeding that psychological manipulation approach. So you can see immediately here, we haven't even finished the discussion, that accusatory interviews actually suppress larger amounts of information. Okay? So we use an open format, explanatory, as opposed to casting questions that only support my hypothesis. If the person doesn't give me an answer that agrees with it, I shut them down. Funny enough, that stuff, the subject doesn't give you anything. Now, spotting deception, this is where we're going to have the big shift. In spotting deception, or what I'm looking now in cognitive reliability format, or the framework, is this statement reliable? Go back and look at the episode where I talked about the IBM instruction manuals tester. Does the subject give you a reliable statement through cognitive cues that you, like a YouTube video, you could actually walk through and you could recreate the act? On the other hand, accusatory interviews are looking for anxiety cues, such things as shifting in the chair, crossing arms, crossing legs, too many details. I'm just reading one of Professor Hartwig's work on about what tactics subjects use. And subjects do not give too many details. They limit as much information as possible to avoid from being attacked or giving the interviewer an edge. So all these anxiety cues, moving and crossing and so forth, are typical of anybody under stress. So you would see a victim do it in recalling in a case, or a witness who is traumatized by what they're seeing, or someone who's been wrongly accused. So the question again, you're going to pick a winner, you're going to pick a loser. If you're going in with accusatory attack, you're going to break your case. And if it doesn't get broken there, remember, the choices you make in the interview room eventually will show up in a courtroom, and you're going to have to explain why you use the accusatory approach and lack of activity. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. We've got another episode coming up next week, number 45. Going into more details. The subscribe button will make sure that you get the notice. We come out every Tuesday morning at 9 Eastern. We've got a great set of episodes. Look at some of the past ones that feed into this section. And remember, the choices you make in the interview are eventually going to show up in a courtroom. Will they survive a Dalbert challenge? So until I see you next week, be safe.